My daughter. In-law said, either you get a job at 72 or get out of my house. What I did next will leave you speechless. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family? Share your story in the comments and hit subscribe for more shocking true stories from grandmothers who fought back. The birthday cake knife gleamed under the kitchen lights as I watched my daughter. In-law Carmen sliced through layers of vanilla and strawberry cream. It was my granddaughter Sophie's 9th birthday, and the house was filled with the sound of children's laughter and parents chatting over glasses of wine. But I felt like a ghost haunting my own family's celebration. Dorothy, can you please move? Carmen snapped without looking at me. You are blocking the counter, and I need to plate these pieces before the ice cream melts. I stepped aside quickly, my arthritic knees protesting the sudden movement. At 72, my body moved slower than my mind wanted it to. But I had learned to navigate around Carmen's impatience. She had been particularly sharp with me all week, ever since I had accidentally knocked over her expensive face cream while cleaning the bathroom. Sorry, dear, I whispered, retreating to the corner where I had been arranging homemade snickerdoodles on a paper plate. I had spent 3 hours the night before baking Sophie's favorite cookies, my hands cramping from rolling each ball of dough. But I wanted to contribute something special to her party. Carmen glanced at my modest plate of cookies and rolled her eyes. Really, Dorothy's store-bought would have been fine. These look so homemade. The way she said homemade made it sound like a disease. I felt heat rise in my cheeks but said nothing. This was Sophie's day, and I wouldn't let family tension ruin it. From my corner, I watched Carmen orchestrate the party like a social media director. She had spent over $300 on decorations, hired a professional photographer, and ordered a custom unicorn cake that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everything was perfect, Pinterest-worthy, designed for maximum impact on her Instagram stories. I clutched the gift I had made for Sophie, a soft pink throw blanket I had crocheted over the past month. Each stitch was infused with love and prayers for my granddaughter's happiness. The yarn had cost me $40 from my Social Security check, a significant expense, but worth every penny to see Sophie smile. Sophie, sweetheart, I said softly, as my granddaughter unwrapped presents surrounded by a dozen other children. This one is from Grandma Dorothy. The living room fell quiet as Sophie took my carefully wrapped package. Her small fingers struggled with the white ribbon I had saved from last Christmas, and I started to help her when Carmen's voice cut through the air like a blade. What is that supposed to be? Carmen's laugh was sharp and cruel, designed to draw attention. A blanket for a 9-year-old. She held up her phone, still live-streaming the party to her followers. Oh my God, guys, look at this. Dorothy made Sophie a blanket. What is this? Little House on the Prairie? The other parents began to chuckle, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Sophie looked confused, holding the soft pink yarn against her chest, uncertain whether to be grateful or ashamed. One of Carmen's friends, a woman named Bethany with perfectly blown out hair and designer everything, leaned over and whispered loudly, "At least it is not another one of those scratchy sweaters old ladies always make." The comment sparked more laughter from the group. I wanted to explain that I had chosen the softest yarn I could find, that I had researched patterns specifically for children, that every stitch represented hours of careful work and love. But the words stuck in my throat as I watched my granddaughter's face. Sophie didn't smile. She didn't say thank you. She just folded the blanket carefully and set it aside, clearly trying not to hurt my feelings while also not wanting to embarrass herself in front of her friends. Carmen wasn't finished with her performance. She walked over to where I stood frozen in humiliation, her voice dripping with false concern. Dorothy, honey, I think we need to have a little talk about age. Appropriate gifts. Sophie is 9, not 90. She needs toys and experiences, not whatever this crafty depression-era stuff is supposed to be. I looked desperately across the room at my son David, searching his face for any sign of the boy I had raised alone after his father Harold died when David was only 10. The child I had worked double shifts at the diner to support through college. the young man I had given my life savings to help start his contracting business. David was standing near the window, beer in hand, staring at his phone with deliberate intensity. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That willful blindness hurt worse than anything Carmen could say. This was my son, the boy I had sung to sleep during thunderstorms, the teenager I had nursed through pneumonia, the man I had celebrated through every milestone and achievement, and he was pretending not to see his wife humiliate his mother in front of strangers. Carmen moved closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow carried across the room. You know what your real problem is, Dorothy. You think you still matter. You think because you squeezed out one kid 40 years ago, the world owes you something. But here's the truth. You are dead weight. You are taking up space that could go to someone useful. The room had gone completely silent now. Even the children stopped their chatter and turned to stare. I could feel every eye on me, watching to see if the old woman would cry, would fight back, or would simply dissolve into nothingness. But Carmen wasn't done. She leaned even closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the wine on her breath, and delivered the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family. I have been patient long enough, Dorothy. You have been freeloading here for 8 months since Harold croaked. Either you get off your ancient ass and get a job, start contributing real money to this household, or pack your musty old belongings and find somewhere else to slowly rot. Do you understand me? This isn't a nursing home, and I am not your caretaker. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, the soft sound of someone setting down a wine glass. Every person in that room was watching, waiting to see how the story would end. My hands were trembling, but not from fear or sadness. Something else was rising in my chest, something that had been building for months of being treated like an unwanted boarder in what I thought was my family's home. Something quiet, but absolutely unbreakable. I looked at Sophie, who was now clutching the pink blanket against her chest, her young face a mixture of confusion and worry. I gave her the gentlest smile I could manage, the kind that says, everything will be okay, even when everything feels shattered. Then I walked past Carmen, past David, past all the staring faces filled with pity and secondhand embarrassment, and went to my bedroom. My fingers were steady as I pulled open the bottom drawer of the old oak dresser Harold and I had bought at an estate sale 40 years ago. Beneath my winter sweaters and faded photographs was a manila envelope I hadn't touched since Harold's funeral 8 months earlier. Inside were documents that told a story Carmen had never bothered to learn and David had apparently forgotten. Property deeds, insurance papers, bank statements, a will that left everything to me, Dorothy Elizabeth Morrison. Not just Harold's pension and life insurance, but complete ownership of the house David and Carmen had been living in rent. Free for the past 3 years, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding these papers that represented a lifetime of work, sacrifice, and careful planning. Harold and I had bought this house in 1985 when David was 12 years old. We had saved for years to afford the down payment, painted every room ourselves, installed hardwood floors on weekends, planted the apple tree in the backyard that now shaded Sophie's swing set. This house held our memories, our sweat, our dreams. We had raised David here, nursed Harold through his cancer here, celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties and graduation dinners here. Every nail, every shingle, every carefully chosen light fixture represented our partnership and our hope for the future. When Harold was diagnosed with lung cancer 3 years ago, we had both agreed that David's family should move in to help with care and household management. We thought having multiple generations under one roof would bring us closer together, create precious memories for Sophie, help David save money for his expanding business. After Harold passed, I felt so grateful for their presence, so afraid of the crushing loneliness that I never questioned the gradual shift from helping Grandma to tolerating Grandma. I never challenged the assumption that this was now their house with me as a barely tolerated guest. But it wasn't their house, it was mine, had always been mine, and would remain mine until I decided otherwise. That night, while Carmen posted photos from the party on Instagram with captions about family challenges and David watched basketball with deliberate focus. I sat in my room and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight or argue or make a scene. I was going to do something much more powerful than shouting or crying or begging for basic human decency. I was going to remember exactly who I was. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress, the one I had worn to Harold's funeral, and took the city bus downtown to the law office of Patricia Hendricks. Patricia had handled Harold's estate planning and had always treated me with genuine respect, never talking down to me the way so many professionals did to widows my age. "Mrs. Morrison," she said warmly, when I was shown into her office. "What a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today?" I placed the manila envelope on her polished desk and began to explain everything. The months of verbal abuse disguised as tough love, the constant reminders that I was a burden, the public humiliation at the birthday party, Carmen's ultimatum about getting a job or leaving, David's devastating silence in the face of his wife's cruelty. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents I had brought. Then she looked at me directly and asked, "Dorothy, what outcome would you like to see?" "I want them to understand that respect isn't optional," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "And I want to make sure this never happens to another woman in my position." Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she had been waiting for someone like me to walk through her door. "I think we can definitely arrange that." Over the next 2 weeks, I began systematically documenting everything. I had learned to use the voice recording function on my old flip phone, and I captured Carmen's daily verbal assaults, her complaints about my uselessness, her threats to dump me at the county facility where I belonged. "God, Dorothy, can you breathe any louder?" she snapped one morning as I was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. "It is like living with a dying whale." Another day, while I was folding laundry in the living room, she was on the phone with her sister, speaking loudly enough for me to clearly hear. "I am basically running a hospice here, except the patient will not die. David feels guilty, but honestly, how long are we supposed to subsidize his mother's existence?" David's silence became just as damning as Carmen's words. When she mocked my appearance, he said nothing. When she criticized my cooking, he remained mute. When she made jokes about my age and declining mobility, he found reasons to leave the room rather than defend me. I recorded it all, every insult, every threat, every moment of deliberate cruelty, because I had learned something important in my 72 years. People who abuse others always claim they were just joking or having a bad day when confronted. But recordings don't lie. I also began researching senior living communities in the area, not because I was surrendering to their demands, but because I was planning my own future on my own terms. I found a beautiful apartment complex, specifically designed for active seniors, with a community garden, book clubs, art classes, and organized trips to the coast. The monthly rent was well within my budget, the budget Carmen apparently didn't realize I had. The waiting list was long because it was such a desirable place to live, but Patricia's connections in the legal community helped expedite my application. Meanwhile, I continued my daily routines as if nothing had changed. I cooked breakfast every morning, did laundry, cleaned bathrooms, picked Sophie up from school when needed, helped with homework. But now I was observing everything with new eyes, seeing clearly how thoroughly they had convinced themselves that I was the problem rather than the solution. Carmen had grown so comfortable with her cruelty that she often forgot I was even in the room. One afternoon, while I was dusting the living room shelves, she was chatting with her book club, laughing about David's decrepit mother, who thinks she is still relevant. "I swear, girls, it is like having a ghost who eats all your food and leaves hair in the shower drain," she said, gesturing dramatically for her audience. "I cannot wait for her to finally shuffle off to whatever nursing home will take her." Another time, I overheard her on the phone with her mother, describing me as the albatross around our necks and complaining that she cannot even redecorate, because David feels guilty about kicking out his elderly mother. Each recorded conversation became evidence. Each cruel comment was carefully documented with dates, times, and witness information. Patricia assured me that while elder abuse laws in Oregon were still evolving, we had more than enough evidence to support any legal action I might choose to pursue. But I wasn't interested in lawsuits or revenge. I wanted something more meaningful than money or punishment. I wanted dignity, and I wanted to ensure that other elderly people wouldn't have to endure what I had experienced. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening in late October. Carmen had been drinking wine at her book club and came home in a particularly volatile mood. Sophie was at a sleepover. David was working late on a construction project, so it was just the two of us in the house. I was washing dishes when Carmen stumbled into the kitchen, wine glass in hand, looking for a fight. "You know what your real problem is, Dorothy?" she slurred, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You think you are entitled to live here just because you are old and pathetic, but you contribute nothing. You are like a human pet that someone forgot to put down." I continued washing dishes, my movements calm and methodical, which seemed to infuriate her further. "Are you even listening to me?" she shrieked, moving closer. "I am talking to you. You dried up, old bitch." The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the kitchen floor, sending fragments across the tiles. Carmen stared at the mess for a moment, then looked at me with pure hatred. "Clean that up," she commanded, "since that is literally the only thing you are good for anymore." I turned off the water, dried my hands carefully on the dish towel, and faced her directly. "Carmen," I said quietly, "you are absolutely right about one thing. Changes need to be made, but they are not the changes you think." She squinted at me suspiciously, swaying slightly from the wine. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I am moving out," I said calmly. "I found a lovely apartment in a senior community. I will be gone by the weekend." For a moment, she looked genuinely surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to actually take action on her threats. Then her expression shifted to something that almost looked like panic. "Wait, what about Sophie?" she said, her voice suddenly less confident. "Who is going to pick her up from school when I have client meetings? Who is going to cook dinner when I am working late? Who is going to do the laundry and clean the house?" I smiled politely, the same smile I had been giving her for months when she hurt my feelings. "I am sure you will figure it out. After all, you have made it very clear that I am useless here." The panic in her eyes intensified as the practical implications of my departure began to sink in. "Dorothy, don't be ridiculous. You cannot just leave. Where would you go? You don't have any money." "Actually," I said, reaching into the drawer where I kept important papers, "I have quite a bit of money. Harold left me very well provided for." I pulled out a copy of the property deed and placed it on the counter. "But more importantly, I own this house. Which means when I leave, you and David will need to start paying rent." Carmen stared at the document, as if it were written in a foreign language. "You what?" "This house has been in my name since 1985, I explained patiently. "Harold and I always kept our major assets separate for tax purposes, but the house was my responsibility. When you moved in 3 years ago, I assumed you understood this was temporary assistance during Harold's illness. I never charged rent because you are family." I paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. "But if you prefer a landlord-tenant relationship rather than a family one, I am happy to accommodate that arrangement. Market rate for a 4-bedroom house in this neighborhood is approximately $3,000 per month." The wine glass fragments crunched under Carmen's feet as she stepped backward, her face cycling through shock, anger, fear, and something that might have been the first glimmer of respect I had seen from her in months. "You cannot do this," she said weakly. "David will never let you kick us out." "I am not kicking anyone out," I replied calmly. "I am simply clarifying the terms of occupancy. You can stay as long as you like, as long as you pay fair market rent and treat me with basic human decency." Or you can continue being cruel and find somewhere else to live. The choice is entirely yours. That night, I could hear heated arguing from their bedroom until well past midnight. David's voice was confused and defensive. Carmen's was shrill and accusatory. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone told me everything I needed to know. Reality was finally setting in. The next morning, David knocked on my bedroom door before leaving for work. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We need to talk, of course, sweetheart. What is on your mind?" He sat heavily on the edge of my bed, suddenly looking more like the uncertain 10-year-old I remembered than the successful contractor he had become. "I had no idea you owned the house. Carmen told me it was part of Harold's estate that became joint property when he died, and when you moved in with us, it transferred to our name. I thought we were helping you." I reached over and took his work, roughened hand in mine. "David Harold left everything to me because he knew I would take care of the family. That is what I have been doing for the past 3 years, taking care of all of you. But taking care doesn't mean accepting abuse." Tears began forming in his eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen from him in months. "I know Carmen can be difficult, but she is under a lot of stress with her job, and Sophie's activities and managing the household." "David," I interrupted gently, "stress doesn't excuse cruelty, and your silence has been just as hurtful as her words." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at our joined hands. When he looked up, his expression reminded me of the scared little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. "What can I do to fix this, Mom? How do I make it right?" "Start by standing up for what is right," I said. "And understand that respect isn't something you give only when it is convenient." Later that morning, Patricia called to tell me that my new apartment would be ready the following week. The timing was perfect. I had already started packing my belongings, not in defeat or desperation, but in anticipation of a new chapter. Carmen had avoided me for the rest of the week, communicating only through David or angry notes left on the kitchen counter. But I noticed she had suddenly become very interested in housework, doing laundry and cleaning bathrooms with an energy she had never shown before. She had also started researching the cost of childcare, meal delivery services, and house cleaning companies. The financial reality of replacing my unpaid labor was apparently quite shocking. On my last evening in the house, Sophie knocked softly on my bedroom door. She was holding the pink blanket I had crocheted for her birthday, wrapped around her shoulders like a royal cape. "Grandma Dorothy," she said in a small voice, "are you leaving because of me? Because I didn't say thank you for the blanket." My heart nearly shattered. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Oh, sweetheart. No, you have nothing to apologize for. I am leaving because I found a wonderful new place to live, where I can have my own space and make new friends. But I heard Mom saying mean things about you," she whispered, "and I didn't like it. But I didn't know what to say. I know you didn't, baby girl. And I want you to remember something very important." I pulled back to look into her serious brown eyes. "Just because someone is older doesn't mean they don't deserve kindness. And just because someone is family doesn't mean they can treat you badly. Promise me you will remember that." She nodded solemnly. "Will I still see you? Will you still be my grandma?" "Of course. My new apartment is only 20 minutes away, and I am planning to volunteer at the library where they have story time for children. Maybe you could come visit sometimes and help me read to the little kids." For the first time in weeks, Sophie smiled genuinely. "I would really like that, Grandma Dorothy." Moving day arrived crisp and clear. One of those October mornings when the air smells like fallen leaves and fresh possibilities. I had hired professional movers to handle my furniture and boxes, and Patricia had arranged for the official rental agreement to be signed that same afternoon. As I was loading my final suitcase into the taxi, David came outside. He stood awkwardly on the front porch, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, looking uncertain and young. "Mom," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Are you sure about this? You don't have to leave." Carmen and I talked, and she is willing to try harder. I walked back to where he stood and placed my weathered hand on his stubbly cheek, the way I used to when he was small and needed comfort. "David, I am not leaving in anger. I am leaving with dignity. There is a very important difference. Will we still be family?" "We will always be family," I said firmly. "But now we will be family by choice, not just by obligation, and that makes the relationship even more precious." My new apartment exceeded every expectation I had dared to have. It was a bright, spacious bedroom unit on the second floor with a balcony overlooking the community garden. The walls were painted a warm cream color, and large windows filled every room with natural light. For the first time in years, I could decorate exactly as I pleased, arrange furniture where I wanted it, and wake up each morning without walking on eggshells. The other residents welcomed me with genuine warmth. There was Martha, a retired librarian who organized weekly book discussions. Frank, a former mechanical engineer who tended the community vegetable garden with scientific precision. Susan, a talented quilter who invited me to join their craft circle. Eleanor, a former teacher who led gentle yoga classes in the community room. These were people who had lived full, productive lives and were now enjoying this new phase with grace, humor, and mutual respect. No one treated me like a burden or made jokes about my age. Instead, they valued my experiences, asked for my opinions, and included me in their activities because they wanted my company, not because they felt obligated. I volunteered at the local elementary school, reading to kindergarten classes and helping struggling students with their homework. I joined the community center's cooking club, where I taught younger women how to make bread from scratch and preserve seasonal fruits for winter. I started taking watercolor painting classes at the community college, discovering an artistic side of myself that I had never had time to explore while raising David and caring for Harold. But perhaps most importantly, I began working with local senior advocacy groups to address elder abuse and neglect. My experience with Carmen had opened my eyes to how common this treatment was. How many older people were suffering in silence, being mistreated by family members who saw them as inconveniences rather than human beings deserving of basic respect. I testified before the county commissioners about the urgent need for better elder protection services. I helped establish a confidential hotline for seniors experiencing abuse or neglect, and I worked with Patricia and other attorneys to create educational materials about elder rights and available resources. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful. Every day brought phone calls from elderly people who had been financially exploited, emotionally abused, or physically neglected by family members. Many of them felt trapped, believing they had no options, no resources, no right to demand better treatment. I shared my story with them, not for sympathy, but to show them that it was possible to reclaim their dignity, to set boundaries, to choose their own path forward. I helped them understand their legal rights, connect with social services, and develop safety plans for escaping abusive situations. 6 months after I moved out, David started visiting regularly. At first, our conversations were awkward and surface-level, polite discussions about weather, Sophie's school activities, and his construction projects. But gradually, we began to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than guilt and obligation. He told me that Carmen had struggled initially with managing all the household responsibilities I had been handling without complaint. The cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare coordination, and general household management had taken up far more time and energy than she had realized. She had also been shocked by the actual cost of running a household when rent, utilities, and all expenses were factored in. The $3,000 in monthly rent had forced them to seriously examine their budget and spending habits. "She has been going to therapy," David said during one of our weekly coffee dates. "She admits that she took her stress and insecurity out on you because she thought you were an easy target who wouldn't fight back." "And what do you think about that?" I asked. stirring honey into my tea. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to articulate his thoughts. "I think I failed you, Mom. I should have protected you. I should have spoken up every single time she was cruel to you. I was so focused on keeping peace in my marriage that I forgot about justice for my mother." It was the most honest conversation we had shared in years, perhaps decades. For the first time since he had become an adult, David was taking full responsibility for his choices, rather than making excuses or deflecting blame. Sophie started visiting me every other weekend, and those visits became the highlight of my weeks. She loved helping in the community garden, learning to identify different plants, insects, and birds. She made fast friends with some of the other residents, who delighted in having a young person around to share stories and teach new skills. Frank taught her how to properly plant seeds and explained the science of composting. Martha introduced her to classic children's literature she had never encountered. Susan showed her basic quilting stitches and helped her create a small wall hanging for her bedroom. And Sophie always brought the pink blanket I had crocheted for her 9th birthday. She used it for picnics in the garden, movie nights in my apartment, and as a reading blanket during our weekly library visits. One Sunday afternoon, while Sophie was helping Frank transplant tomato seedlings, she looked up at me with dirt smudged on her nose and said, "Grandma Dorothy, I like you better now." "What do you mean, sweetheart? Before, when you lived at our house, you were always sad and quiet and trying not to bother anyone. But here, you smile all the time and laugh with your friends and do interesting things. It is like you got bigger somehow, even though you are the same size, out of the mouths of babes." That summer brought an unexpected phone call. Carmen asked if she could come visit me alone. I was surprised, but agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my apartment complex. She looked different than I remembered. Less polished and performative, more genuine and vulnerable. She sat across from me, nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup, clearly struggling with how to begin the conversation. Finally, she looked up and met my eyes directly. "Dorothy, I owe you a sincere apology, not just for the birthday party or the cruel things I said that night, but for the way I treated you every single day for months. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry." I waited for her to continue, saying nothing. "I have been in therapy for the past 6 months, trying to understand why I was so awful to you. Part of it was stress and feeling overwhelmed with work and parenting. But that is not an excuse for cruelty. Part of it was fear. Fear that you were judging my parenting, or my housekeeping, or my life choices. But mostly, I think I was threatened by your relationship with David and Sophie." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. "I was afraid that you would always be more important to them than I was. So I tried to make you smaller to make myself feel bigger. I realize now how cruel and stupid that was. You weren't my competition. You were supposed to be my ally, my family. And I threw away 3 years of having an amazing grandmother figure for Sophie because I was too insecure and selfish to see what a gift that was." I reached across the table and covered her trembling hand with mine. "Carmen, I appreciate your apology, and I accept it. But I want you to understand something important. I didn't leave to punish you. I left to save myself." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. "I know. And I am glad you did. Sophie talks about you constantly now. About your apartment, and your friends, and all the interesting things you do together. She is proud of you in a way she never was when you were living with us. Because then you were just there, invisible. Now you are someone with your own life and your own accomplishments." We talked for another 2 hours, honestly and openly, about family dynamics, generational differences, and the challenges of blended households. Carmen told me about her own difficult relationship with her critical mother, how she had projected some of that pain onto me, treating me the way she wished she could stand up to her own mother. She also admitted that she had never really understood my financial situation or legal rights regarding the house. "I honestly thought you were dependent on us," she said. David never explained that you owned the house or that you had your own significant income. I saw you as this helpless widow who needed our charity rather than an independent woman who was choosing to help her family. By the time we left the coffee shop, we weren't best friends. But we had reached a genuine understanding. We were family, and family relationships require effort, respect, and communication from everyone involved. 1 year later, I was invited to speak at the statewide conference on aging and elder rights. I had become something of an accidental advocate, sharing my story to help others recognize the signs of elder abuse and understand their legal rights and available resources. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of social workers, attorneys, family members, and seniors themselves, I felt a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't how I had planned to spend my 70s, but it was exactly what I was meant to do with this stage of my life. Too many of us accept mistreatment because we have been conditioned to believe that aging makes us less valuable, I said, my voice strong and clear. We are told we should be grateful for any attention, any help, any tolerance, but dignity isn't something we age out of. Respect isn't something we have to earn by being convenient or invisible. I talked about the importance of financial literacy for seniors, about understanding legal rights, about the difference between accepting help and accepting abuse. I shared practical strategies for documentation, communication, and seeking support. After the conference, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. Adult children who were struggling to balance caregiving with respect, seniors who had been financially exploited by family members, professional caregivers who had witnessed abuse but didn't know how to address it effectively. Each conversation reinforced my understanding that elder abuse isn't just about individual bad actors. It is about societal attitudes that devalue aging and treat elderly people as burdens rather than resources. A young woman in her 30s approached me near the end of the day. She had tired eyes and worry lines that seemed too deep for her age. "My grandmother has been living with my family for 2 years," she said quietly. "After hearing your story, I am realizing that we might not be treating her very well. Not intentionally. But we have gotten into patterns of talking about her like she is not there, making decisions without consulting her, treating her like a child rather than an adult. What should I do?" I gave her practical advice about communication, boundaries, and resources. But mostly, I encouraged her to have an honest conversation with her grandmother about what she needed, what she wanted, and how she was feeling about the living arrangement. "The solution might surprise you," I said. "Sometimes the kindest thing is helping someone maintain their independence rather than assuming they need to be taken care of." Now, at 74, I live a life I could never have imagined during those dark months of feeling invisible and disposable. My days are filled with purpose, friendship, meaningful work, and genuine joy. I serve on the boards of 3 different senior advocacy organizations. I am co-authoring a book about elder rights with Patricia. I have developed deep, authentic friendships with people who value my wisdom and experience. Most importantly, I have a relationship with my family that is built on choice, respect, and genuine affection rather than obligation, guilt, and resentment. David and I have lunch together every Wednesday, and our conversations are honest, meaningful, and mutually supportive. Sophie, now 11, visits every other weekend and has become passionate about social justice and gardening. Interests I like to think she developed through our time together. Even Carmen and I have developed a cautious but genuine friendship. She often asks for my advice about parenting challenges, and I have helped her navigate some difficult family situations with her own mother. We are planning a joint birthday party for Sophie's 12th birthday, and Carmen has specifically asked me to make my famous snickerdoodles. But perhaps most importantly, I have learned that starting over isn't just something young people do. At any age, in any circumstance, we have the power to choose dignity over convenience, respect over comfort, truth over peacekeeping. The pink blanket I crocheted for Sophie's 9th birthday now lives permanently in my apartment. She uses it when she stays overnight, and it has become a symbol of something precious, the love that persists even when relationships change, even when people disappoint us, even